The fire crackled low in the center of the gathering, its embers glowing like old wounds still refusing to fade. Children huddled close to their mothers. Young men leaned in, their brows furrowed beneath the flickering light. And the old sat silently, eyes already knowing, lips sealed from speaking what they remembered. Only the griot stood, tall and draped in faded indigo robes, a carved staff in hand, and a voice soaked in the dust of ages. "There was once," he began, his tone soft but cutting through the dark like a blade, "a girl not marked by stars or prophecy, but by iron and cruelty." His eyes swept the circle, stopping briefly at a boy mouthing the word he knew was coming. The griot raised a hand. "Don't say it," he warned. "Don't let your tongue taste it, or it might burn." Silence fell again. "In the old kingdoms," he continued, "before the fires walked on two legs, there was a word the highborn used as they pleased. A word heavy with chains. They spat it at children who were stolen, at mothers who were sold, at fathers who bled in fields not their own. Ndulu, they called them." At the sound of the word, a few elders shifted uneasily. A girl coughed, her face pale. A man by the edge of the circle murmured something under his breath and suddenly gripped his throat, wincing as if the air had grown sharp. The griot looked at him but said nothing. He only nodded and continued. "That word," he said, walking slowly around the fire, "was once just breath and sound. Now, it's flame. You speak it now, and your lips dry like leaves. Your throat tightens. Some bleed. Some die. Why?" He tapped his staff on the ground. "Because of one girl. A girl they called slave and branded so. They thought they owned her. Thought her voice would vanish. Thought pain would silence her. But she did not break. She became something else." The flames rose with the wind, casting dancing shadows across the listeners' faces. "She was the last to bear the word on her back," he said. "And the first to burn it into those who dared speak it again." A child's voice, shaky, broke the quiet. "What was her name?" The griot paused. The wind hushed. Even the fire seemed to lower its breath. "That," he whispered, eyes glittering, "is what you must hear. For her name swallowed the word whole, and when you learn it, you will understand why that cursed word is now afraid to be spoken." The circle leaned closer. The story had begun. She came into the world beneath a cracked sky, the earth so dry it split like old pottery. Wabani had not seen rain in 6 harvests, and when the baby girl was born, her mother died before she could hold her. The midwife said her heart gave out with the final push. No one cried. No wailing songs were sung. The villagers said it was a bad omen for a child to steal breath from the one who bore her. Her father, a quiet man named Kalum, held her only once. The very next morning, the king's tax riders came. They took Kalum for dead, dragged him away in chains because his field had yielded only dust. They left the child behind, wailing into the arms of her mother's sister, who already had 7 mouths to feed. She didn't name the girl out of love, but out of spite. "Itu," she said, as she swaddled the infant in goat cloth. "Burden. That's all she is." And so Itu she became. She grew in the shadows of silence. Her cousins played under mango trees and bathed in the shallow stream when water was kind. But Itu fetched firewood, cleaned wounds, and scrubbed the floor until her fingers cracked. When she turned 7, she still had never been told a story, never been sung a lullaby. She began humming to herself while working, making up tunes with no words. But even this annoyed her aunt, who one day slapped her and said, "Even your hums are heavy." By her 10th year, Itu had learned that kindness was not owed to the unwanted. She kept her eyes low, her hands busy, and her mouth closed. Still, food was thrown at her like scraps, and her sleeping mat was shoved behind the goat shed. Then came the year of drought's teeth, when even the stream dried to mud and men began selling goats for a handful of maize. That was when the slavers came. Their cloaks were dust-colored, their camels tall and quiet. They offered silver coins and 2 bundles of rice for any girl of working age. Itu's aunt did not hesitate. Before the sun fell, Itu was tied by the wrists, loaded onto a cart with 3 other girls, and pulled away from Wabani forever. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears were wasted in places where no one wiped them. The road to Odom burned her soles raw. They walked during the day and stopped only when stars filled the sky. The men gave them salted water and flat bread and said nothing else. When one girl tried to run, she was whipped until she couldn't walk. Itu helped her limp for the next 2 nights. At the end of the journey rose the gates of Odom, towering walls of red stone and smoke, where the houses touched the sky and the air smelled of roasted meat and blood. There, in the yard of the slavers' hall, the girls were lined up. One by one, each was stripped, scrubbed, and forced to kneel beside a metal brazier. Itu watched the iron being pulled from the coals, glowing like the belly of a sun. She had never heard the word they spoke until that moment. Ndulu, the slaver said, pressing the rod into her back. She didn't scream, not aloud. But her body jerked, and her hands clawed at the dust as her skin sizzled under the word. Her knees gave out. The last thing she remembered was the smell, her own flesh rising in smoke. She awoke on a straw mat, her back bandaged and burning, a rope around her ankles. A woman in fine robes stood above her. "You now belong to the house of Soromu," she said, her voice like glass. "You will not speak unless spoken to. You will never ask questions. You will never use a name, not even your own. That name no longer lives." From that day forward, she worked in silence, scrubbing floors, washing feet, cutting herbs, sweeping ashes. The branding on her back itched and stung and oozed in the night. The other slaves avoided her. The masters did not bother to learn her face. But one night, Itu crept into the storeroom behind the kitchen, alone, cold, and aching with the kind of hunger that came from being forgotten. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then knelt in the dark. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she whispered the name her mother might have given her. Not Itu, not Burden, but the name that had lived only inside her thoughts, the name she used to hum to herself like a secret lullaby. "Lami," she breathed. Her voice was soft as smoke. And then, it vanished. Her voice disappeared completely. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. She slapped her chest, tried to cough, tried to sing, nothing. It was as if the wind had stolen the air from her throat. She stayed voiceless for 3 days. No one noticed. When her voice returned, it came in a rasp, and she never dared whisper her name again. But deep inside her, something had shifted. The name hadn't left her. It had gone deeper. Beneath the brand. Beneath the pain. Waiting. Waiting to rise again. The house of Soromu stood tall and cold, built not for shelter but for domination. Its walls were carved from pale gray stone that never warmed, even beneath Odom's blistering sun. There was no softness here, only echoing steps and eyes that looked through you, as if you were part of the furniture. Itu moved like smoke, quiet, quick, and unnoticed. She scrubbed floors with water that bit her knuckles, carried jugs taller than her spine, and bowed so low her forehead bore a permanent mark from the stone. Her body bent, her voice stayed hidden, and her thoughts retreated further inward. The Soroma mistresses, 5 sisters with voices sharp as broken ivory, enjoyed testing her limits. One would drop a goblet and force her to pick up the shards with bare hands. Another would spill oil just to make her clean it again and again. But it was Soromu's son, Masoro, who turned cruelty into ritual. Every evening, as the moon hung high and dinner plates clinked with roasted meats, Masoro would beckon Itu to the center of the courtyard. Guests would lounge on silk cushions, sipping fermented milk and laughing behind jeweled teeth. Masoro, always half-drunk, would lean forward and smile like a snake. "Show them," he'd say. "Kneel. Say what you are." Itu would kneel. He'd pull down the back of her rough linen tunic to reveal the scarred word across her shoulders. Louder, he'd hiss. "Say it." And with a breath that tasted like shame, Itu would speak the word burned into her flesh. Ndulu. It hurt every time. Not just her pride or her throat, but something deeper, something ancient in her bones. But she said it. Because silence brought beatings, and she had learned the rhythm of survival. In the silence between chores and commands, ITU watched. She listened. She began noticing things no one else did, the tremble in a mistress's hand before she fainted, the way the guards whispered when they thought no one was near, the creak in the upper stair before someone descended. And then there was the cook, Biba. Old, bent, and slow, Biba had once been feared for her spiced soups that made warriors weep and princes beg. But now, she was nearly forgotten. She sang to the pots in a language ITU didn't recognize. The other servants avoided her. Said she had once poisoned a king's cousin and walked away free. Biba saw ITU. She spoke to her in riddles, asked her questions that weren't really questions. How do you flavor silence, girl, she'd say, stirring a thick broth. With what has been stolen. They worked side by side in the kitchen. Biba never asked her to speak, only to hum. And so ITU began humming again, low and strange melodies that seemed to bubble in the stew. In return, Biba taught her songs not sung with the mouth. Songs that vibrated in the chest, passed through fingers into the earth, invisible and alive. These aren't for everyone, Biba warned one night as she crushed dried seeds with a blackened stone. Only the broken can carry them. That night, Biba sang a tune while smearing ash across the cooking hearth. The next morning, she was gone. No one knew what happened. No screams, no signs of struggle. Just silence. The guards searched her room, found nothing. The mistresses shrugged and assigned a new cook. But ITU felt the air shift. She returned to the kitchen that evening. The fire had long died. She moved carefully, searching for, she didn't know what. Then she saw it. Inside the clay pot Biba had stirred the night before lay a small object wrapped in palm fiber. ITU reached in and unwrapped it slowly. Her breath caught. It was shaped like a tongue, shriveled, scorched, blackened at the edges. Not wood, not stone. Something older. Bone, maybe. Or something once alive. ITU didn't know what it meant, but her hands trembled. She carried the charm back to the shed where she slept. She pressed it to her palm, curious, reverent. It burned. Not like fire, this was colder than cold. Her skin hissed. Her eyes rolled back. And in the darkness behind her vision, a voice rose. You will remember, it said, low and humming, the sound of your name. Then silence. The charm fell from her hand, now cold as stone. Her skin bore no wound, but her heart raced like it would burst. That night, ITU did not sleep. She sat upright, listening to the quiet between heartbeats. Not one command was shouted. Not one footstep dared pass her door. The world around her held its breath. And within her, something old and buried began to stir, something deeper than obedience, stronger than pain. Not yet awake. But no longer asleep. The moon over Odom turned red that week. Some said it was dust in the air. Others whispered of old spirits shifting in the soil. But within the walls of the house of Soromu, no one spoke of moons or spirits. They were too busy trying to ignore what they could not explain. It began at one of Masoro's usual feasts. The courtyard was loud with music, the smell of roasted yam and honey meat thick in the air. ITU moved like always, silent, careful, small. She carried pitchers, wiped spills, fetched figs, and did not meet eyes. Until one guest, a man with gold rings in his nose and fire wine in his belly, pointed at her and laughed. She's got that word on her back, he slurred, elbowing Masoro. The little Ndalu. Should make her recite it again, like before. Masoro smirked. She will. But before he could command her, the guest wheezed suddenly and clutched his throat. The laughter vanished. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He stood, panicked, grasping his neck as if choking, though he could breathe just fine. His lips moved. No voice followed. The musicians fell silent. The fire dimmed. Masoro snapped his fingers for guards. Get him out. That night, Itu lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the feast had followed her back. She reached a hand behind her shoulder to touch the brand. It felt warm. Alive. She crawled to the cracked bronze mirror by the wall, battered and dull, the glass inside warped. For years, she'd avoided it. She knew what she'd see, a girl with hollow cheeks, skin stretched thin by labor, and a gaze dulled by years of being forgotten. But the girl looking back wasn't broken. Her back glowed faintly through the fabric. Not a brand anymore, something more like a sigil pulsing beneath her skin. Her face looked sharper, older. Not with age, but with knowledge. Her hair hung longer than she remembered. And behind her, no, around her, there was a shape. A kind of shadow crown made of smoke and ash, hovering like a halo made from storms. She blinked. It faded. But it had been there. Sleep came late. And when it did, the dreams were not her own. She stood in a dark chamber where chains hung like vines from the ceiling. The air was damp and filled with echoes. A boy sat in the center, wrists bound, head bowed. His skin was dusted with red clay. His eyes lifted slowly. "You've been sleeping too long," he said. Itu took a step back. "Who are you?" He smiled, sad and knowing. "You've forgotten your name." She clutched her throat. "I can't say it." "You will," he said. "And when you do, they'll remember what they tried to bury." She wanted to ask more, but the dream dissolved like mist. It returned the next night. And the next. Always the same chamber. The boy always there. He never said his own name. But every time she came, he spoke hers. Softly. Gently. As if waking a bird that had slept through 100 seasons. She never repeated it aloud. Until one night, she did. The air was thick. The sky above the mansion was cloudless, yet the wind blew hot and restless. Itu stood near the edge of the courtyard, watching the fire pits flicker in their stone bowls. Servants moved through shadows like insects. She heard the word behind her. The cursed one. A younger servant boy, new to the house, pointed at her and whispered to another, "That's the Ndulu, isn't it?" She turned. The boy flinched. And before she knew why, she said it. Not the cursed word. Her word. Her name. Lami. It came out not in a whisper, but in a voice that did not belong only to her. It was deep, like wind through a canyon. Soft, like the first drop of rain. Sharp, like a blade drawn in silence. The courtyard fire pits exploded upward. Flames surged 3 times their height, dancing wildly, casting moving shadows of beasts and wings on the walls. The boy screamed. He clutched his mouth and fell to the ground, writhing, smoke rising from between his lips. He had only whispered the word. Now his tongue blistered and cracked as if he had licked the coals. The guards came running. Masoro yelled for water. The mistresses wailed in confusion. Everyone screamed. Everyone but Itu. She stood still, untouched by flame or fear. The branding on her back now glowed like heated gold. Her shadow behind her stretched long across the wall, and it moved even when she didn't. No one dared speak to her that night. By dawn, whispers filled the halls. The boy hadn't died, but he no longer spoke. His tongue had swollen beyond use. His teeth had loosened. He stared at Itu whenever she passed, eyes wide with something between fear and worship. In her sleep that night, the boy in chains spoke again. "They're learning," he said. "But they haven't understood." "I don't want to be feared," she replied. "I just want my name." He nodded. "Then keep saying it. Speak it until the word they gave you rots from every mouth." Itu woke before dawn. The fire pits were ash. The mistresses were silent. Even Masoro didn't summon her that morning. And from that day forward, whenever someone tried to call her the cursed word, their voice would falter. Some coughed blood. Some forgot what they were about to say. Others looked at her and chose silence instead. Her pain had started echoing. And the echo had begun to answer back. The banquet was a spectacle. Warlords from every corner of the burning lands arrived in caravans of color and steel. Horses dressed in crimson silk. Guards with curved swords polished to a mirror shine. The house of Soromu had spared no expense, every pillar was draped in gold-threaded banners, and the courtyard had been transformed into a temple of excess. Smoke rose from fat-roasted antelope, platters overflowed with yellow melon and honey-baked bread, and drums thundered in the distance to mark the hour. And in the center of it all was Itu. They had dressed her in a golden robe that caught the torchlight, her skin glowing like dark copper beneath it. Thin bangles clinked around her wrists, but her feet were still bare, touching the cold stone floor like roots. She held a silver pitcher of spiced wine in both hands and moved from table to table without a word. No one had told her to speak. No one dared. The warlords chuckled and argued and praised the Soromo hosts. Masoro strutted like a peacock, offering boasts about the loyalty of his slaves and the perfection of his court. The mistresses beamed, false and fluttering. The fire pits were lit higher than usual, dancing like spirits with too much to drink. Then came the moment. A warlord from the eastern dunes, thick-necked and red-eyed from drink, slapped his hand on the table as Itu passed and bellowed, "She's the famous one, isn't she? The little Ndulu with fire for blood." The other guests paused, wine halfway to their lips. He laughed louder, pointing at her with a greasy finger. "Come now, girl. Say it. Tell us what you are." Itu stopped beside him, pitcher still raised. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear. Just looked. He kept laughing. Then choked. A flash, quick, sharp, and blinding. His mouth flared orange, and flames licked the insides of his cheeks. His scream came too late. Smoke poured from his lips, eyes rolling back. He fell backward, writhing, clawing at his own face as if he could tear the fire out. Panic broke like a dam. Some stood, knocking goblets over. Others reached for water, for cloth, for reason. Masoro shouted for guards. One of the mistresses fainted into her chair. Through it all, Itu did not flinch. She stepped slowly, gracefully, to the far edge of the banquet hall. Her feet whispered across the stone. She turned to face them all, the pitcher of wine still in her hands, untouched. And she smiled. It was not cruel. It was not vengeful. It was the smile of a silence finally being heard. No one dared approach her. The warlord survived, though his tongue blackened and peeled. He would never speak again. They carried him out on a plank of wood, eyes wild with terror. That night, as the flames outside died to coals, the household was shaken by another event. A new slave had arrived that morning, a boy of 12, captured from the hill tribes. As was tradition, he was brought to the branding room beneath the stone steps. The iron was placed in the fire, coals stacked high, bellows roaring. But it would not heat. The blacksmith tried again. Again. He cursed, wiped sweat from his brow, and threw in more fuel. Still cold. Every branding iron in the chamber turned cold as river stone. Even when placed directly into open flame, they stayed black and dull. "Bring another," the guards yelled. They did. 3 more. None glowed. None hissed. The fire licked but did not take. The boy, who had been shivering with fear, now stared at Itu, who had appeared without sound in the doorway. She said nothing. But the guards lowered the irons and stepped back. They did not say the word. They did not even whisper it. Something had changed. The fire had chosen sides. And it no longer belonged to them. The night Itu left the house of Soromu, no dogs barked. No guards stirred. No one saw her mount the chestnut horse tethered by the kitchen wall, nor heard the soft clop of hooves fading into the wilderness. She rode without saddle or lantern, barefoot in the moonlight, the golden robe fluttering like smoke behind her. The wind whispered through the trees, and the word on her back, Ndulu, burned softly, as though sensing something was near. She did not look back. For 3 days, she rode through dry plains and scorched hills. On the 4th, the sky shifted. The air thickened. The trees began to twist into strange shapes, some bent like kneeling figures, others like mouths crying upward. Crows circled silently. The land grew darker even as the sun remained above. She had reached it, the forest of forgotten names. No road led in. No road led out. This was the place the griots never sang of, the forest where the enslaved had once fled and vanished. Where names erased by chains were said to still echo through the leaves. No kingdom claimed this place. No master dared to chase a runaway here. The trees were massive and old, gnarled like the fists of ancestors. Vines hung like curtains. As she passed beneath them, the forest hummed. Not with birds. Not with beasts. With voices. Soft. Faint. Endless. Names. Koma. Arya. Duma. They floated through the air, layered over each other like overlapping ripples in a pond. She turned her head and saw no one. Yet the voices continued, some joyous, some leaping, some whispering with a kind of rage too deep for language. She dismounted and walked. The horse refused to follow, backing away, eyes wide. So she went alone, her bare feet pressing into moss thick as burial cloth. The deeper she went, the louder the names grew. She felt them brush against her arms like cold hands. One voice passed directly through her chest. It was a girl's, barely older than a child, and it spoke a name she somehow knew had been stolen centuries ago. Still, she walked. At the center of the forest stood a tree unlike the rest. A baobab, taller than any temple, its trunk black as night, its bark etched with lines that shimmered like coals. No leaves. No fruit. Just 1,000 roots twisted in agony around its base. The voices ceased. Silence returned. Itu stepped forward, her heart thrumming like a drum. She knelt at the foot of the tree and placed her hands on the earth. I came to give it back, she whispered. No answer. I came to take it back, she said again. Still nothing. Then she did the only thing the forest would understand. She reached behind her, tore a sharp thorn from her own robe's hem, and sliced the inside of her palm. Her blood dripped into the roots, thick and dark. The baobab groaned. Not with wood, but with voice. It shifted. The great trunk bent, not from wind, not from age, but toward her, like a bow. Its branches reached low, wrapping the sky in shadow. The burning on her back flared. She gasped, falling forward. The pain was familiar, but different. Not cruel. Not claiming. Transforming. The brand lifted from her skin like smoke torn from fire. It hovered behind her, spinning slowly in the air, a glowing circle of letters and heat, no longer attached to her flesh, no longer carved into her silence. It spun faster. The word Ndula pulsed in the air, letters melting and reforming, shedding like snake skin. Then it shattered into ash, and reassembled, still spinning, now burning with her breath. Not a mark. A weapon. A crown. And she knew, without needing to be told, the word no longer owned her. It was hers now. The voices in the forest returned. Louder this time. Stronger. They did not call out to her, they sang. Chants and tongues long forgotten, but she understood them all. Not with her mind, but with her marrow. You carry us, they said. You are our mouth. You are the fire they fed too long. She stood, blood drying on her hand. The crown of flame spun quietly behind her like a halo of ash. When she left the forest, the horse was waiting at the edge. It knelt before her. She rode back through the land like smoke through gaps in stone. From that day forward, when someone dared to speak that cursed word, Ndulu, in her presence, the fire bloomed not from hearths but from throats. It did not matter if they whispered or shouted. It did not matter if they meant to harm or jest. The word had weight now. And she was the one who held it. She had walked through silence, carried pain, and found her name beneath the ash. Now she rode with it in her hands. And the word that once burned her now burned for her. They saw her long before she entered the capital. First in the whisper of wind that carried the scent of ash and iron. Then in the stillness of the air, birds stopped singing, and even the dogs would not bark. By the time she crossed the old stone bridge into the city, markets fell quiet. Women pulled their children inside. Men turned away without knowing why. Even beggars did not stretch out their hands. Itu had returned. But not as the barefoot girl who once poured wine in silence. She came cloaked in robes the color of stormed earth, ash-gray and heavy. Around her brow coiled a crown made of bone, finger bones, jaw bones, teeth, sanded smooth and set into a circlet like ivory pearls. Behind her floated the burning wheel of letters, her old brand, now pulsing like a silent sun. Her feet were still bare, but the ground did not dare to cut them. She walked straight through the capital. Past soldiers. Past griots. Past men who once bought and sold girls like her as if they were livestock. Those who whispered Ndulu as she passed, those who smirked, mocked, or remembered her name only in chains, their mouths dried mid-sentence. Their tongues cracked. Some screamed. Some choked. No one stopped her. By the time she reached the gates of the Soromo estate, silence had spread across the capital like a plague. The iron gates swung open before she touched them. Inside, the great house stood as proud as ever, painted walls, polished wood, banners of wealth flapping above. The courtyard, once full of laughter and drunken men, was now still. Slaves froze mid-task. The children of Soromo peeked from windows. She walked in. The family waited for her on the veranda, Soromo himself dressed in royal blue, the colors of a man who thought himself above consequence. His wife stood beside him, trembling. Itu, Soromo said, the name slipping from his mouth like oil on fire. Ndulu. The moment the word passed his lips, the crown behind her blazed. A wind shot through the courtyard. Soromo's mouth froze open. Then, flame. Not from the sky, not from any hand, but from inside his body. His throat lit like a furnace. He clawed at his tongue, his neck, his chest, but the fire had no source and no mercy. He fell, choking on his own breath as smoke poured from his mouth. Others began to scream. His wife called for help. His brother tried to run. Two more said the word, just once, in fear, in pleading. They burned too. No blade had been drawn. No army had arrived. But judgment had come. Itu stood still, watching them writhe, not with joy, not with vengeance, but with eyes like stone worn smooth by rivers. When the fire died, she stepped forward. The children of the house, 3 of them, none older than 10, stood in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. She knelt. You will live, she said softly, looking into their faces. But you will grow up in silence. You will hear no bedtime stories, no songs from your fathers, no cruel jokes passed over roasted meat. She stood, and the burning circle behind her flickered low. Let that silence teach you what noise never did. No one tried to stop her as she left. No soldier dared raise a weapon. In the markets, crowds parted before her like tides. Some bowed. Some wept. Many did nothing, but all remembered. And every man who had once bought a girl for coin now carried sand in his mouth when he tried to speak of her. She did not stay in the city. That night, Itu returned to the outskirts, where the fields met the forest. She found a quiet grove of thorn trees and built no fire. She sat on the earth, alone beneath the stars. And there, finally, she wept. Not because of sorrow. Not because of regret. But because the girl once called slave had become something the world could no longer chain. Because the body that once flinched from branding irons now carried fire inside it. Because the voice that was stolen now lived in a silence that spoke louder than screams. And because she knew, justice was not a loud blade, but a quiet return. The wind carried her tears to the roots of the trees. The ground held them. The stars blinked above, and somewhere deep in the forest of forgotten names, the baobab sighed with pride. Empires would fall. Kings would kneel. And her name, once erased, would never be forgotten again. Across the regions, through dust-blown savannas and deep into red clay valleys, the word began to vanish. Not by decree. Not by law. But by fear. At first, only a few believed it. A merchant in Zamber, they said, had laughed at an old tale and spoke the cursed word beside a hearth. His skin blistered. The flame rose unnaturally high. His laughter turned to screams before anyone could fetch water. Then came the butcher in Dhari, who whispered the word into his stew, mocking the girl whose silence had once been bought with chains. His house burned from the inside out. Only his cleaver survived. No one knew the rules at first. Was it only near fire? Was it only in jest? But soon the answer became clear: the word itself had been claimed. It no longer belonged to men. It no longer bent under cruelty or echoed in the voices of masters. It was hers now. And it would burn whoever dared twist it. Across kingdoms, tongues grew careful. Parents no longer scolded daughters with that word. Traders scrubbed it from their ledgers. Slavers began using euphemisms, the quiet ones, the silent stock, the gold-footed, but even those grew heavy in their mouths. Children played a game in the villages: whisper the cursed word and see if the candle flickers. None played twice. Then the warlord from the north came. He had heard of the girl-turned-ghost. Of the whisper ban. Of tongues gone dry and flames that disobeyed physics. He laughed, drunk on blood and pride, and declared her a tale for fools. So when his men caught a barefoot woman walking alone at the edge of the long plains, wrapped in gray robes, her head unbowed, he did not ask questions. He only barked one command. Chain the ND. He didn't finish. The word jammed in his throat like bone. Smoke poured from his mouth, thick and oily. His guards dropped their weapons, unsure what to fight. His eyes rolled white. The iron cuffs in their hands melted into slag. By the time his body hit the ground, the woman was gone. The guards fled. No one returned to the northern fort. Soon after, the stories changed. They no longer called her a girl. Or a slave. Or even a woman. She became something else. A force. A whisper. They said she walked without leaving footprints. That rivers rose to shield her, and flames knelt at her feet. That she had no tongue, yet all fire spoke for her. Some claimed they saw her riding the backs of shadow leopards through moonless forests. Others swore they glimpsed her in crowded cities, always barefoot, always silent, before their lanterns flickered out. But one thing united every tale. The word could no longer be said. It had become sacred. Heavy. Carved in fire. And in that silence, Itu's legend bloomed like wild thorns. Not because she killed. Not because she ruled. But because she took the one thing meant to break her, and sharpened it into a blade the world could not hold. To name her was to summon judgment. To mock her was to be marked. And so the world, at last, learned to speak her name with care, or not at all. In the shadow of a mountain where no road dared reach, nestled beneath tall whispering trees, there lived a village with no gates, no masters, and no chains. It was a quiet place, built from what was left behind. Stones once used to build prisons now formed the foundations of homes. Iron tools once meant for branding now tilled soil and carved stories into wood. The people here had names long hidden, names that the world had tried to erase, and every morning began with a breath, a prayer, and a memory spoken aloud so the forgetting would never return. Among them walked a woman with silver-gray robes and long, scarred feet that no longer felt pain. The children didn't know her past in full. Some called her the Firewalker. Others, the Wordbreaker. But most just called her Itu. The one who had no brand. She did not carry the same rage as before. Her smile came easier now, her silence softer, not sharp. In the evenings, she sat beneath the fig tree, humming to herself as little girls with shaven heads and bare shoulders leaned against her legs, eyes wide with wonder. Each had escaped chains. Each had found their way to her. Itu never asked their old names. She only helped them plant new ones. Pick a name like you're planting a seed, she would say. It will grow with you, shape with you. Let no one rename your roots. One child, small with eyes too big for her face, once asked while weaving a reed basket, "But what about your seed? What was your name before?" Itu smiled. Not sadly. Not proudly. Just quietly. She leaned in, touched the child's cheek, and whispered a name into her ear, one she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The wind rustled gently through the trees as if receiving it. No fire rose. No tongue caught. The name lifted like smoke and drifted into the sky. It was safe now. Later that season, a griot arrived in the village. He was lean, with a traveling drum and eyes full of roads he'd walked. They welcomed him as they welcomed all who came without chains. That night, they gathered around the fire, and he played a soft rhythm, his voice rising and falling like hills. He told stories of queens buried in rivers, of talking masks, of ancestors who danced with shadows. The children clapped. The elders nodded. Then his rhythm changed. He spoke of the old empires. Of rebellion. Of the girl taken in gold chains. He paused. The fire behind him hissed. And then, without knowing, perhaps, he tried to name her past. To speak of her, he said, is to speak of the girl they once called Ndol. He didn't finish. His mouth twitched. His lips cracked. A line of blood traced down from the corner of his smile. He coughed once, then twice. The drum slid from his lap. The fire behind him stood still and tall, not flickering, not dancing. The village was silent. Itu rose slowly, not angry, not harsh. She walked toward the griot, and he bowed his head in shame, a trembling hand over his lips. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tell another story," she said softly. "One with names that survive." The griot nodded. The blood stopped. He began again, this time with a tale of a girl who fed wind to the birds and taught orphans to write their dreams in ash. The fire, finally, danced again. And Itu returned to the fig tree, surrounded once more by children with names strong as stone, rooted deep, watered daily. They would not carry brands. Only names. Names that could never again be burned from their backs or stolen from their tongues. And that, she knew, was enough. In the bustling markets of Odom, where spices perfume the air and traders shout from dawn till dusk, there is one word no voice dares utter. It is not forbidden by any king, nor written in any law. Yet none say it. Not bakers kneading dough. Not soldiers in their drunken boasts. Not even the cruelest slaver-turned-merchant, now posing as a man of honor. For the old word, the one used to name chains and break spirits, has turned to fire. They say that once, a drunken man spatted in jest outside the city gates. The next breath he took came out as smoke. He clutched his throat, gasping. His lips blackened. No water could soothe him. The air around him shimmered with heat, though the evening was cool. Another time, a noble whispered it during a private gathering, mocking a girl with soot on her arms. The lamps flickered violently. A crack opened in the wall behind him, as if scorched by lightning. The noble's mouth never spoke again, only wheezed ash until his dying day. And the stories grew. Some say, if you whisper the word after sunset, the air thickens and your tongue swells. Some swear they've seen a woman in ash robes standing behind those who try, barefoot, silent, crowned in smoke. No one has ever heard her speak. She doesn't need to. In Odom, they've forgotten what the word sounded like. Children ask their elders what it meant, and the elders shake their heads, eyes lowered. Some words burn, they say. Let them stay buried. And somewhere in the wind, drifting through fig trees and mountain paths, a name lives on. Not the burnt word, but the one that walked out of fire and made the world afraid of what it once spoke.